There's something lurking in my backyard, and it's unlike anything you could imagine. It all started about a month ago when I was living in an urban area of southern Ontario, Canada. My backyard features a large patio swing and a concrete path leading to a big white garage. Beyond the garage lies a narrow alleyway and a modest shopping plaza. It's an ordinary place, until I began to hear strange noises at night that made me question my safety. One quiet Friday night, I let my dogs out, only to hear rustling leaves. I initially thought it was just some wildlife, but the footsteps were heavy, human-like. The motion sensor light illuminating the yard didn't turn on, leaving me in the dark, and my heart raced as I ran back inside. But the strange occurrences didn't stop there. Just a few nights later, I heard the footsteps again, but this time, they were quicker, almost as if someone was jogging around outside. Fast forward to 2 weeks ago, when I spotted a figure peeking around an old tree trunk. My heart dropped. I knew then that my backyard had transformed into something far from ordinary, a space haunted by an unexplained presence watching me from the shadows. The thing in my backyard. I posted this on No Sleep, but this is definitely paranormal. This was no regular person. It all started about a month ago. I live in urban Canada, in southern Ontario, and I have a pretty decent-sized backyard with a large patio swing on one side of a concrete path. I also cut down some trees on that side, close to a garage. The garage is a pretty big white structure, completely disconnected from the house. Beyond the garage is an alleyway, followed by a small shopping plaza that runs from the street in front of my house to the alley, with a small lane for traffic. I have 3 dogs, so obviously, I let them out to run around the backyard for a while. There's a bright motion sensor light connected to the house that can illuminate most of the yard, but you have to be at a really weird angle to set it off, and a pretty large object needs to be in the way to trigger it. Usually, if you're in the lane I mentioned earlier, you can set it off. There's also a big plate window in the kitchen, the closest room to the backyard, where the door to the backyard is located. One quiet Friday night, I let my dogs out to do their business. They barked a few times, and I opened the door to call them back in. For some reason, I decided to listen outside for a few more seconds. That's when I heard footsteps in the leaves. Usually, that's nothing to worry about, just raccoons or squirrels, which can be absolute nuisances and never shut up in my backyard. But these footsteps were heavy, like a human's, and they moved with a pace that felt distinctly human. I could hear the footsteps walking around, but the light was off, so I couldn't see anything. I briskly ran back into the house and sat inside, away from the back door. A few nights later, I heard the same footsteps again, but this time they were quicker, as if a person was jogging around outside. Once again, the damn light was off, so I couldn't see anything. Fast forward to about 2 weeks ago when I saw something near the old tree trunk. This tree trunk must be about 9 or 10 feet tall, and I saw what looked like a person peeking around it before ducking back out of sight. I freaked out, my heart racing. I booked it back into the house and heard the yard fence rustling, like a chain-link fence rattling. I looked through the big window facing the lane and noticed the edge of the light flicker on. Whatever did that had triggered the light, so it wasn't any common yard-dwelling animal. The experience in Florida. Last night, I had another strange experience around 9 p.m. I was hanging out with a buddy of mine in his backyard, sitting on a picnic table adjacent to his house in some woods, with his baby monitor nearby. We were in the middle of a conversation when I began to feel that typical ringing in your ears sensation that everyone experiences from time to time. I wasn't shocked by this yet, and I truly believe the sound was a normal noise produced by my body, not an external stimulus. About 10 seconds later, the sound intensified while I was still speaking. The ringing became louder than my own voice, almost shaking my brain. It was extremely high-pitched, and my ears aren't usually the best at picking up high frequencies. I began to panic. What the hell, am I going deaf right now? Was the first thing I thought. Just as I was about to express my fear of going suddenly deaf, my friend said, "Bro, do you hear that?" Thank God he heard it too. But what the hell was it? It sort of sounded like it was coming from the woods, but it was very hard to pinpoint. We sat there, confused, looking at each other as we were essentially battered by this running sound. House alarms, bugs in the woods, alien satellites, North Korea, EMPs, whatever it was. It got louder, and I genuinely thought I was going deaf. It was unlike any noise, frequency, or pitch I had ever encountered. It literally shook my brain and bones as if it had entered me. The strangest thing about this whole ordeal was that my buddy's baby monitor turned off during the ringing sounds. It was totally crazy. There was absolutely no external sound besides the ringing. Eventually, the ringing subsided slowly, and then more slowly, until it completely went away, and the lullaby from the monitor came back on. This was probably no more than 45 seconds, but it was definitely a "what the hell" moment for my buddy and me. We just sat there, contemplating dozens of things it could have been, but I guess it remains an unsolved phenomenon. Has anyone else experienced the hum? Now, about the entity I encountered as a child, I still cannot find any information on it, but I'm hoping someone here will know what I'm talking about. When I was a young child, I was sleeping over at my grandparents' house. I remember playing in the backyard and skinning my knee. My grandpa brought me into the bedroom and washed it for me. He once had brought some kind of medication and put it on my wound, and it hurt so much that I screamed. "Do you want to get some bandages?" Being an old war vet, he was the type who was prepared for anything. I was alone in the bedroom, crying like any other 7-year-old would after having what seemed like acid thrown on an open wound. I remember looking out the window to try to distract myself, gazing at my grandpa's lemon tree in the backyard, its leaves swaying in the breeze. That's when I saw an entity I can only describe as a mix between a harlequin and Maleficent. It was tall and skinny, wearing weird black clothes that looked like robes. It was a woman with pale, greenish skin that seemed dark at the same time. She came to the window, poked her head inside the room, and screamed at me. I'm still not sure if she was mocking me, or maybe yelling at me to stop crying. I ran back outside and never saw her again. My grandpa came back into the room a few seconds later and bandaged me up. I never told anyone about it because I didn't want anyone to think I was crazy. I always heard from my grandmother that their house was cursed. It had belonged to her mother, who had built it herself. People had died there, though not from murders. There had been fights. Every kid she had, along with her 4 sisters, had grown up there. The house had seen a ton of drama, and my grandmother, being a religious woman, believed it had left a curse, demons or something, behind in that house. I never saw that entity again, nor did I ever hear of anyone seeing anything similar. The only other thing I ever saw in my grandparents' house was a shadow person, but nothing as concrete as that woman. Can anyone help me figure out what it was that I saw that day? I still bear the scar on my knee from that incident, and I remember it vividly. Inside my living room, in a house with a somewhat open floor plan for the common spaces, you could sit in the living room and see all of the kitchen and the den area, which had a fireplace. At one time, leading from the den into the backyard, there were large glass patio doors. On the back side of the kitchen was an enclosed patio door with a window leading to that from the original dining room area. One afternoon, I was binge-watching something or another when movement caught my eye outside. There was a young man in denim and a white and red Letterman's jacket moving back and forth extremely rapidly in the backyard, zooming back and forth past the patio windows. Then he saw me and stopped, moving over to the door between the kitchen and the patio. I did not recognize this kid. I merely thought I should protect my family. So, I sent him the message that he could not enter. Over the course of a few months, he kept on returning. I denied him entrance to the house. I told him that the original owners were not there anymore. He told me that he knew. He said he was from my hometown and that he knew my daughter. One night when I was home alone, I told him that I would speak to him on the patio. I was a little wary of seeing that face peering through the patio door, so I went outside. I hear spirits very often. Seeing spirits is less common for me, though it has been increasing over the past few years. This young man related that he had died in an auto accident and wanted to come into the house to apologize to my daughter for something. I told him he could not come inside. He showed me the accident. I remembered my daughter telling me about his death. She said he was an acquaintance and that he was a friend of hers from math class 3 or 4 years before this. Yet I was determined that he would not upset her or harm her in any way. His buddies had tormented her before he died. He and his buddies had assaulted several students. Yet the school did nothing until they beat a neighborhood boy into a coma. Halfway through the school year, the school's reaction was to suspend the previous victims when they reported the threats and violence. One of my daughter's friends was suspended for 2 weeks straight when he reported that he was being threatened by these same kids. So, I decided to homeschool my children when my child finally told me she had been targeted. It was the best way to protect her. This kid was one of the bullies, and my daughter was unaware he was part of that group. I said I was sorry, but I would protect my daughter and my son, and there was a barrier on the entire outside of the house for a reason. I told him that I needed to feel comfortable with him and his true intentions before I would even allow him inside my house. I asked him if he had any idea of the pain and grief he had subjected my child to. In a class of about 40 students, she was the only one who was passing. The idiot teacher had announced this to the entire class. This communication between he and I went on intermittently for months and months. You see, spirits who are one thing and pretend to be something else eventually give themselves up. So, I watched and waited for him to do the same, for him to reveal himself. I ignored him unless I felt like engaging. I refused him permission to attach to us or to the house. Eventually, I learned his identity. I learned that he was actually from our hometown. He had said some hurtful things to my daughter in class. He said he wanted to make amends. Apparently, he was refusing to cross over until he had finished apologizing to my daughter and a number of other people. I kept him outside, but he kept staring in the window during the daytime. No less. I went out and put a barrier in the garage and around the enclosed patio area. One day, however, I relented after a lot of interaction and observation. I knew he was who he said he was. I could sense his remorse. I went out in the backyard to converse. I told him that he could apologize to my daughter outside on the patio. She was not to see him or hear him consciously. She might not acknowledge him or even forgive him. It was her choice in the end, right? I said he needed to come when I was at home, not to come when I was not at home. That I would be watching and waiting to step in to kick some spiritual ass if he stepped out of line. This bully agreed. We were sitting on the patio, my daughter, her best friend, and I, binge-watching something that we had been watching together. He came to the outside patio doors. I threw up some white light barriers around her and asked as many spirit guides and angels as I could to come and surround us to protect us. Then I told him he could talk to her from outside her protective barrier. He apologized. My girl was his last apology. I thanked him for doing that and told him that I knew I'd made him prove himself for months. He smiled and thanked me. I wished him peace and told him he should go into the light and explained a few things about it. I watched him go. I haven't seen him since. I don't usually need to speak out loud. The girls never notice anything once I'm binge watching a TV show. Solid black 3D figure. This is my story. I was 14 years old at the time. My friends and I were playing a game of tag outside my house. There were 3 of us in total, and my friend and I were hiding from the third kid. We genuinely just stayed within the bounds of the house, meaning the front, sides, and backyards of my house. My friend and I were hiding in the side yard opposite where we thought the person who was searching for us. However, it was unusual how we had been hiding for so long. The kid never circled the house to look for us or try to find us. That's when my friend and I decided to circle from the side yard to the backyard. I checked the other side yard to try to get a better read on where the kid actually was. We were looking for him now instead of him going around looking for us. It was as if we were the people. We traveled around the backyard and were kind of hesitant to turn the corner of the house into the side yard. We decided that we would count down from 3 and then swiftly check around the corner for the kid. We had no idea what a surprise we were going to get. We started the countdown. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. So we whipped around the corner of the house only to see an upright, 3D solid figure standing right before us. The moment we turned, we ran as fast as we could, not processing what in the world we had just seen. In that moment, we both just figured that it was the kid. We didn't know anything was wrong until we both stopped running and looked at each other, confused. Then suddenly, in our minds, it clicked for both of us as the kid came around from the opposite side of the house, asking why we looked so frightened. By then, my friend and I were thoroughly creeped out. We explained the story to my mom, but she brushed it off as a shadow or just a figment of our childish imagination. But this was not a shadow. This was solid and standing upright with no one else around to cast that shadow. Reflecting on everything that happened, I realize there are things in life we simply cannot explain. Mysterious shadows can come and go, but not all of them carry dark intentions. While the feeling of fear still lingers, I know that strength and support from loved ones can help us overcome the terrors of the past. As I remember those days, I see not just a haunting memory but a lesson about courage and forgiveness. Those spirits may no longer trouble us, but they leave behind stories to tell and emotions to share. If you've had any strange experiences like this, please share your story with us in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends so they can hear these fascinating tales too. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our future stories. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Midnight Shadows.